perspectives from the global south. We have here a group of very interesting people. Mariama Williams from the Institute of Law and Economics at Jamaica, Integrated Policy Research Institutes in the US, and the Global Afro-Descendant Climate Justice Collaborative. We also have Fernanda Feio from the Fluminense Federal University and Rio de Janeiro Federal University, and Daniela Bacas from the Brazilian Development Bank, BNDES. And sharing with me the moderation, I am from the Federal University of Rio. We have Luis Miguel Galindo from UNAM, Mexico. As you can see, we have these diverse, and you're going to hear and see very interesting and qualified people to contribute to what we expect to be an instigating conversation. So thanks. Later on, Cristina Reis from the Minister of Finance, from the Brazilian Minister of Finance, is going to join us. She's finishing a meeting and she's going to join us. So with this group, so thanks Mariama, Fernanda, Daniela, Luis, and Chris, and a special thanks to the affiliated institutions from each one, and from IDRC, from the Canadian IDRC, for their resolute, permanent, and very effective support in research and research action projects for a long time, and especially on the issue of climate change, care, and the related things. The dynamics of this meeting, after my opening, Luis Miguel will convey a few ideas, hopefully just start to provoke your brains, dear panelists, to discuss. And then at an initial 3 minutes round from each one. And then we start the conversation. We want to focus not as much on the needs of finance and the needs of changing the institutional framework for climate change and care, but much more on what are the essentials to put finance in place. And most of all, what are the challenges and the hurdles to put these things in place, and if there is any possibility how to circumvent difficulties. I'm sure that from the different angles, there would be interesting contributions, interesting examples. So we hope to have a lively conversation during this hour and a half of time that we have. So Luis Miguel, up to you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I will just put some debates that are now in the discussion, and I think it's important to begin to talk about them. No? The first thing I would like to say is we know that the Paris Climate Change Agreement tries to establish a target of a temperature increase of between 1.5 and 2 degrees during this century. For that matter, we need to have a carbon neutral economy between 250 and 270. However, I mean, these targets there were a significant discussion of why 1.5 and 2, but basically the idea is that above 1.5, we begin to have significant damages, and probably irreversible damages and non-linear damages. In that case, and as you see how we are moving in the last years and the general perspective, it might become more and more difficult that we achieve the target of 1.5. In that case, there is a discussion of what to do in developing countries. Shall we stay more on adaptation projects and try to save our natural resources, the most vulnerable people, and how much to put or address or mobilize resources for the mitigation strategy? I think that's one of the key discussions, or where to put the money, and of course, where to put the financial part. The second thing I think it's very relevant in this discussion is, of course, I mean, we have discussed that a few times, and I'm not going to go into that, but there is the idea to change to a carbon neutral economy in the next 30 years. It implies significant structural changes to the economy. And of course, with these significant changes of the economy, there are a lot of winners and losers in that part. No, there is, of course, economic sectors that they might lose in that transformation, but as well a lot of employment. And there is as well a lot of problem with the people that they work in these areas, so they change for different reasons, and they are very vulnerable to the climate change impacts. In that sense, and considering the amount of things we need to do, I think it's a discussion of what does it imply, this transition. If it really requires general political, economical, and social consensus for most of the people to make possible and feasible these transitions. In a sense that the only way to make this transition is to design transitions that they are called just transitions. Or on the contrary, if it's possible to do these transitions, just considering a few parts, not technological parts, and move forward in this direction. I think those debates are in the center of the discussion now and how to move forward. I'm just going to leave it here so we can have a discussion, and then we'll go to other debates that I think they are relevant. Thank you.
Okay, Luis, who wants to start? Cristina is joining in a few minutes, but let's start. Who wants to come?
I could start.
All right, Mariama, let's go.
Yeah, am I on? Yes, you could hear me. Okay, so good morning, everyone. It's really a pleasure and an honor to be part of this dialogue from Seville to Belem. And because when we look at the financing landscape today, and the truth is unavoidable, right? Without debt justice, there's no climate justice. So last year, developing countries spent over $400 billion servicing external debt, with total climate finance flows was less than a quarter of that, about 90 billion. So, and at a time where climate finance flow is not reaching communities, and there's only 15 to 20% going to adaptation, and adaptation cost is estimated by UNEP and others at about 400 billion annually. This is a serious problem for communities. Now, when we talk about, and that's for the visible economy, when we talk about the invisible economy, the care economy, where women provide 76% of unpaid work globally, which is up to about 11% of world GNP. This care work becomes the first line of defense when a disaster hits. And yet it is invisible in climate strategies and climate finance flow. So we need to actually really begin to think about how care and its invisibility in budget and climate plans predisposes communities, especially the most vulnerable in our cities and rural areas, to suffer from disaster. And that's why the road from Seville to Belem matter. Seville gave us a consensus that the system is not working, and Belem must deliver a breakthrough, especially as Brazil has signaled a present focus on social justice. So we need for the 3% of climate finance projects that generate, quote, gender equality results to be upscaled significantly. So I want to leave us with the fact that climate financing care is financing resilience, and just as critical as financing energy or infrastructure. So as we shift from Seville to Belem, our task is clear. Make care visible, make justice non-negotiable. I think we can say, what did FFD achieve? Well, FFD achieved a number of things. I mean, it's very weak, as everybody knows. It acknowledged the financing gap. It made a commitment again, as was done in FFD1, FFD2, Addis Ababa, to domestic resource mobilization. Except here we talk more about strengthening tax system and focusing more on progressive taxation. It also talked a little bit about debt and sovereignty and lending reforms, but it hasn't proposed any real systematic measures to address debt. And it hasn't really focused on the international financial architecture, included private forms. So we need new platforms and new initiatives. And I think some of these things are what we're looking for. And I think the presidency of COP30 with the finance minister circle, has rightly seen that this is an important area that must be tackled. What does FFD lack? And it's still of concern is the level of ambition versus implementation.
Yes.
Commitments are weak or vague with limited enforceability of timeline. We know one of the biggest emission, the US withdraw. We know that there are weakness in certain key areas, as I flagged already, climate finance, environmental commitment are weak. We are having next week in New York, well, New York or Geneva, it's not clear yet, the Secretary General's meeting that will focus on the NDCs, what countries are proposing to do. And the expectation from all of us, government and civil society alike, is that they will all fall short of what we need in terms of what Miguel has talked about, meeting the Paris Agreement,
Okay.
in terms of emission reduction and in terms of aligning finance to be consistent with the Paris goals. So the pace is slow, but the urgency is necessary and important. And we have to match the other big animal out there in the room, which is the 2030 agenda, which include, of course, the finance goal and care and gender equality. So while Seville commitment established a framework for action on financing for development, its effectiveness will depend on political will, with the role of major powers and the ability to translate these commitments into reforming finance flow. Areas where I believe FFD is likely to drive change include increased visibility of the need for the annual SDGs, the $1 trillion, and keeping global attention on that issue, which has kind of faded in the background amidst the turmoil about tariffs and all of the various things that are going on.
Okay.
It can also strengthen tax cooperation framework, and it can also, I think, leave more momentum to our debt sustainability initiative. But it remains weak and is unlikely to deliver enforcement, commitment, climate finance language remains weak. The global financial governance reform, and now we can talk about trade reform, are also at loggerheads. And I will leave that there.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Christina, welcome. Luis Miguel just gave us an introduction pointing out that adaptation, not only in the size of the problem, but then the adaptation dimension is important. And Mariama just finished here giving a round of the urgent need of moving forward and making the question how to make climate justice doable, how to raise awareness, and she put the political will dimension. So now we'll follow with the 3 minutes first introduction. Who wants to go? Daniela, Fernanda, or Daniela? Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Good morning to you all. Thank you for the invitation, João, Carolina. Honored to be here with this distinguished panel people. I was wondering when you talked a little bit early this week, João, if I should start with the positive side or challenging, not negative, but a negative side. And I decided now to start with the positive one, and then we can go through the challenges, and we have a room for debate, more challenging things later in this discussion. Yeah, of course, the negative side is totally clear with Mariama talk before, and we have many gaps, especially for financing, mitigation, and adaptation for the global south and emerging countries, developing world. And we know that, and you know that we are more vulnerable to climate change effect as well, and also not only economically, but disproportionately affecting vulnerable people, gender aspects, and so forth. But this is the negative, as everyone is aware of it. But I would like to, for a perspective of a development bank, we have some good news. We have positive side, and we have some examples to share, I would say. And one is that we, developing banks and organization, national or local, can have a role, strategic role on this entangle and unlock this finance, climate finance, and sustainable finance in general. And I would just say that we have an example in Brazil with the, of course, BNDES as a national bank is working hard in sustainable finance for a while, but I would share just one example more recently, that we have a climate fund in Brazil. And the climate fund is managed by the environmental ministry, but BNDES is the operator agent of these, the reimbursable or credit side of this fund. And we had a very low scale of this fund that was launched in Copenhagen, COP15 in 2009. And then in 2024, the scale shifted enormously from this fund because the Treasury, Brazilian Treasury, and Cristina can say better later, but it's a huge example of how we can unlock some finance on this climate agenda. The Treasury issued sustainable bonds, internationally sovereign sustainable bonds, and could replenish the fund, shifting enormously the scale to, in 1 year, to almost $2 billion in 2024, and we have another budget for 2025. And so we could manage more pipeline. We open a pipeline for mitigation and adaptation projects that we are fostering hardly. When you can say after our efforts on adaptation as a provocative side from the panel from Galindo and Mariama, how to manage the resilience and finance adaptation. But I would say that this is an example of a big arrangement of policy, a climate policy, a fund established for a policy initiative, national policy, that has a development bank as an operator and trying to connect the investments, international investments, external investments, to increase the scale and pipeline of climate projects. No, so this is just one of the examples. We can explore more later, but we start with this positive example and we can detail them more lately. Thank you, João.
Okay, we want to know more. Mariama mentioned the dimension of political will. There is also the dimension of strong institutions that Daniela is bringing about. The Brazilian Development Bank has almost 70 years of age and doing development service. But I would like to explore later on, how, and maybe Cristina can go this. These are very short windows of opportunity. They come out, in a moment. How do you actually manage to align things? And the political will, we've seen on the positive side, but there is history also of the negative. And you may have strong institutions, but depending on the political will, you can shift the way around. And there are many examples in the current world around these issues. So we should explore these later. I don't know, Cristina, do you want to come now? Or Fernanda?
I do. Yes. Thank you, João. Hello, Mariama. Pleasure to meet you.
Good morning, Minister.
placer conocerte también. My friends Fernanda, Daniela, and of course, João.
Cristina, can you put your microphone closer, please? Thank you.
Do you hear me better now?
Yes.
Yes. So it's very nice to discuss this with you, and much better now that João gave me this windows of opportunity topic to comment and to tell a little bit how we see them here from the public sector and the federal government point of view. But I must tell you that before I came here, I am actually a professor at the Federal University of ABC. I have been studying sustainable development for some years now, or decades, we can say too. And I'm
Cristina,
also,
sorry. Your microphone is still a bit sort of far away. So, you know, in the recording and maybe the people cannot hear you well.
do you hear me better? No, just a moment.
Maybe I can go and Cristina can wrap it up. I will leave her while she's
coming back.
Oh, she's coming back. She's coming
with
back.
a new instrument. Let's see if it works. Okay.
So, what about now? Do you hear me better?
A bit, yes.
Sorry about this. So, as I was saying, it's very weird to be here at the government and to see those windows and sometimes huge doors of opportunities. And you have the responsibility to do something, but you have to coordinate with many people, institutions, and also to fight with many political different interests related to those windows. So talking about the windows, now we see for sure that sustainability brings new technological goods that are that will become the establishment, the mainstream in the future, related to clean energy, related to forests, related to agriculture, to biofuels. And so Brazil historically had difficulties in playing a relevant role in the international value chains and in the dominance of some key technologies. But we can actually see that now there are some niche activities that we have comparative or competitive advantages, and that we should really strengthen them and give scale to projects related to them. And that's the role of some instruments of sustainable finance, and I'm sure that Fernando will talk about it, that should be promoted to allow for the scale of these projects and for new companies getting better insertion in local, regional, and international value chains. So what we've been doing here with the Ecological Transformation Plan is to design those instruments, those tools, such as the Eco-Invest program that provides foreign exchange hedging to the investors, the sovereign sustainable bonds with which resources are being rechanneled into the climate funds that Daniela just mentioned, the sustainable taxonomy that defines which activities are more sustainable, taking into consideration not only mitigation or adaptation objectives, but also social objectives, such as more equality, gender and race equality. And of course, carbon markets, both in the voluntary and in the compliance sides, that can provide opportunities, but they can also be another vehicle or mean to produce more concentration. So the strategic role of the regulation is to define how these technological opportunities related to sustainability will actually contribute to the benefit of all. Let's summarize like this: to redistribute income and wealth, and to reduce the technology and the financial dependencies that are traditional in these so-called center-periphery relationships. So, and just to finalize, there is another window of opportunity now related to the political position of the United States. So, if the US are playing this game, neglecting the climate change problem and jeopardizing trade and investment flows, we see that this can be trouble for the rest of the world. But if the rest of the world take this opportunity to unite themselves and find new trade and investment routes, so again, we have to be very quick and to get this. I always say this in my class: the horse of the history horse. We have to jump in this horse and guarantee that we are leading this and commanding our participation in the history dynamics. So I'll stop here.
Okay, so far, Luis Miguel and Mariama put challenges and the problems that we have, and Daniela and Cristina put the perspective of there are windows of opportunity with specific cases. So now we are going to sort of navigate between these two things. It's still to come is how these solutions come about and what you had to face to actually put them in motion. But maybe Fernanda can do a sort of a come into the floor now and provide us her vision. Please, Fernanda.
Well, thank you, João. It's a great pleasure to be here and to share the floor with such a good friends and people who are doing such an amazing job. It's actually kind of give us hope for the future with the job that is being done in the government, in the BNDES. It's great. I'm sure they'll be sharing more about that here, but it's good to hear and it gives us hope. However, I want to talk a little bit about the contradictions for the Global South, in particular for the Latin American, the Caribbean of the global order. We are one of the regions who are the most affected, the most vulnerable to the climate change crisis, and yet, at the same time, we are constrained by the limits of an unequal global financial order. And it's clear for me that it's not only about how to increase the financial flow, it is also about how to redirect them in a structural way towards environmental, towards social, towards climate, and towards intergenerational justice. And I think the work is also about that. That's what Mariama was saying about the care, the care work that it's being done and how to finance it. That's what BNDES is doing, trying to create a new instrument, a new financial instrument towards biodiversity. And that's what the Brazilian taxonomy system that Cristina is implementing, the Ministry of Finance is implementing, but Cristina is leading it. This is why we must rebuild. That's how we must rebuild the notion of financing for development, because now we have to align with goals of sustainability, with goals of equity, with goals of biodiversity, and making it the priorities of the global financial market. And the sustainable green transition will only be possible if we have a deep transformation of financial regulation. I think the central banks are key players in this process. For far too long, we've been seeing regulation and we've been treating regulation as neutral, detached from development objectives, detached from development goals. But I think neutrality is not neutral. Okay, under the paradigm of price stability and financial liberalization, monetary policy and central banks were reduced to control inflation and maintain market confidence, which are very important goals. But in this way, the regulatory system has continued financing destructive activities, has continually allowing assets that carry the same social environmental weight that damage the environment. And we must revert this logic, okay? Financial regulation, it must be reoriented as an active instrument for the transition, capable of channeling capital away from harmful investments. And I'm sure the sustainable taxonomy that Brazil is implementing is, again, I bring this topic because it is such a strategic tool, and it's being it's a very important tool to reorient this finance flow towards sustainability. And I want to wrap up saying that another key instrument here, and it's not only because Daniela is here, but another key instruments are public banks in general and development banks in specifically. This is because those are the instruments that can work in a new logic. They can fund long-term goals, they can fund new objectives, and they have to work in the multi-level way. We have to integrate the multilateral development banks with the national development banks goals, and integrating the regional development banks that here in Latin America we have so many, and they have to be working together in a system that respected the national sovereignty, that bring the multilateral, the international money into the system, and that can be directed to the territory that where the climate change is the most felt. So we have to wrap up. Finally, we have two major actors here to reorientate this financial floor, and they are key. They are the central banks that have to incorporate that, and I cannot stress this enough. Central banks must incorporate sustainability into their mandates, not because it's important, not because the world is going to end or the life as we know, but because climate crisis will produce macroeconomic change and will produce instability in the financial system. And we have to strengthen our financial system with public banks, with development banks, so they are the agents who channel this money towards mitigation and adaptation flows, and loss and damage. That is something that we hardly talk about, but they are the ones who should be doing this as well. So thank you, and I'm looking forward to hear more of what you guys have to say.
Okay, now I'm going to make questions here on the direction, taking up what you have said. And I'll start with the last one, and the question is for the academics. How can academics contribute? You know, Fernanda mentioned that the central bank is essential, but what is the methodology to be used? The knowledge level of risk management in terms of the VAR systems and the market risk, and no. These are very well established.
Yes.
Now, bringing the environment, where is the methodology? Where are the concepts? Wait.
Sorry, sorry.
What are the methods? So the knowledge base that would sustain a lot of the actions that the Minister of Finance, the Development Bank, the Central Bank, they lack concepts, they lack knowledge, they lack methodologies. I would like to ask Galindo and Fernanda about this. Now, on the civil society, Mariam, civil society has a major role to play, which is to push the agenda, politically push the agenda. Now, to what extent should civil societies engage in actual policy design, policy implementation, to influencing? To which level should civil society influence or participate? And where is the division of labor, if you wish, between your inherent role and the actual implementation? Yeah. And for our friends in government, you are introducing new agenda in very well established institution. I don't know from people that Cristina is part of a group that is an institutional innovation, that within the Ministry of Finance, there is a department, a secretary, there is a formal hierarchy of institution, of groups of people that is dealing with the climate and environment issues that came up with the ecological transition plan that is so, the issues that she said was so successful. Now, this is the Minister of Finance. A Minister of Finance everywhere, and in a development bank with the long established, the guarantees, the rate of return, my losses, there is the bank dimension. And it's easier to finance something that is very well established, that the return, if you fund a factory, that you can calculate your internal rate of return, the guarantee, relatively to things that are unknown, things that are small, things that are very relevant but not. So how to engage established institutions in the process of change? Yeah. And for all of you, what is the role of the political will in the very end? That is the political dimension of this. How to deal with these things? Yeah. Sorry, if there are something that I respect that the intimacy of all the institutions that we put them aside. So, who wants to jump in first? And let's please. I was very generous with the time. Let's be shorter now.
Okay. Well, thank you. I will say something, but I wanted to also just say a little thing about the central bank and the bankers, because I think the methodology is not the missing issue. Part of it is also how national governments restructure monetary policy and regulations around commercial banks, investment banks, and pension funds. Because even when you talk to pension funds, they will tell you that there are rules that regulate them, that prevents them from also getting involved in climate finance, which seems to be risky. So that's it. But I think at the level of the central bank, there's been a lot of ongoing work, right? In the networking for green in the financial system, a disclosure framework, the TCFD, and all of those. So I think we have a lot of patchwork of things that need to be consolidated, right? And I don't think methodology is necessarily the issue. Yes, they can have more methodology. We always argue about that. So I just want to put that out. In terms of civil society's involvement in policy framework, I think that civil society is very much involved and has to be involved because they're working on the ground. And most of them. So we have to distinguish between civil society, right? So there's the big NGOs who are like corporations in a sense that they have their own networks, all over the globe. And then there's community-based civil societies. And then there's a meso level of private sector organizations, different institutional actors who are private sector are part of that. And I raised that question because when I did some work with the Green Climate Fund, and the climate market, the Carbon Market Association, and the stock market associations, they were part of our civil society, coming up with rules for involvement of civil societies. And now with the Fund for Loss and Damage, the fund responsible for loss and damage, civil society are very much involved in trying to make sure that the aspects of loss and damage that they're seeing on the ground, that communities want, indigenous communities, Afro-descendant communities want, are part and parcel of how you set a framework in place. So they're at the ground, like we were in the Green Climate Fund, agitating for different windows. We weren't always successful. We didn't get a window that now the Green Climate Fund, after almost 10 years, is beginning to recognize that the efficiency and effectiveness of it is diluted because it doesn't have a way to incorporate the voices from the ground, right, into it. So now they're talking about having SMAs, funding block for SMAs, as in addition to the private sector facility. They're talking about different ways to get community involved. Same way civil society is pushing at the level of the fund responsible for loss and damage right now in the meetings to make sure that all of the things are built in from the beginning in terms of environmental and social agreement. My last point is that civil society has also been functioning as a watchdog over the movement of climate finance,
Yes.
over taxation, over debt. We have a lot of macroeconomic groups, right? We have some inroads in that the IMF has finally been persuaded to recognize that climate change is macroprudential, as is gender inequality macroprudential.
Yes.
Those things come from civil society working.
Yeah.
Now they
Yes.
get incorporated in ways sometimes we don't like, but the idea is that the push is what has opened up some of these doors. So I'll just leave that there.
Yes, no, that is, and that is a open issue, yeah? The UN system, for example, is country-based, and there's all this movement from civil society. When, you know, in my time with the United Nations, there was always, they don't know how to deal with, you know, the participation, the voting system. So you bring it, but yes. Galindo, you want to come?
Yes, thank you. Just a few comments. The first about what you say at the end of the political will. I think increasingly we are facing the idea that the climate change is a development issue. Without solving climate change, the physical impacts and the changes of society that we need to do in production and consumption patterns and economic structure are not possible if we don't change the style of development. So that's only possible with a general political will and a big consensus in favor of these things. No? The idea that we can solve the problem with some technological parts and a few instruments, I think it's not good enough. No? We need to think big in this case. No? The second thing I think it's important, I think there are contradictory effects. I'm trying to generate a debate because on one side you see in most of government institutions, of course, the banks, the financial ministers, and all this part, two things. No? On one side, you have increasing evidence that climate change matters for development. I mean, excess of rain, the natural climate disasters, all these things affect output, affects communities, affects prices, and all these things. No? As well, there is a lot of economic instruments, as they are already mentioned, it's a few already very interesting, that you have thematic bonds that you need to match with the targets that you want to achieve in the green path, no? Or all these things. No? And it's not that easy to understand exactly how you match that and how you fulfill these things. No? And for example, the idea that they are going to use a global carbon tax or a CBAM, which is a carbon adjustment border tax. So all these things, they are impacting now, or the financial minister begins to recognize in general that the topic is something that they need to be on top of that. But in the other side, I think there is still sort of financial skepticism about climate change. No? When you see a lot of private banks, they haven't really incorporated, as you mentioned before, the idea of how to administrate risks, no? And how you do this. I mean, not in specific cases, but in a systematic way, how to put it there, no? And the idea that you need to move in a direction that all the financial part is consistent with the construction of a carbon net zero economy, no? It's difficult sometimes to think, okay, we are increasing the amount of finance to sustainable development. We still have a lot of industries that they are very intensive in carbon emissions, and they don't have a penalty on that, no, or an issue. So I think we need to move in that direction. And I discovered in some of the studies we've done that there is very important the technical part, no? I mean, especially in Latin America, of course, the most large economies, they can do it themselves. But to give some South-South cooperation, how to issue the bonds, how to deal with all these things, how to deal with systematic risk, how to increase financial part, I think it could be very interesting to do it. No, I mean, in the case of the financial institutions in Brazil and these things, to support other countries to move in this direction. No? And the last point I want to say is that there is a problem. I mean, I do realize that we are moving as well, trying to support adaptation and nature and all these parts. No? However, for the financial sector, there is still difficult to have risks and metrics to support the magnitude of the financial part you need to give to nature or adaptation. No? And we need to develop those parts in the next few years at a high speed. Otherwise, it will be difficult for the banks, even if they want to do it, to fulfill the gap in finance in these sectors.
So the knowledge generation sector, like the academics, would have a role to play in that, yeah?
Exactly, that's the point.
Yeah. One thing that calls my attention, maybe Cristina and Daniela and Fernanda can react to this. Galindo mentioned that development and the climate dimension and the care dimension are linked together. Perfect. And he said we have to think systemically or big. But the actual policy actions, they are very punctual. Yeah. How to reconcile the capacity of policy design and policy implementation with this think big? Is this just the overall reference, and then we have to act within that? And I think that Cristina was mentioning about the niche strategy. How to implement this and how to keep a niche strategy that can jump out of a main direction, and how to choose, or I don't know if it's to choose. The notion of niche strategy, Galindo, would be important, especially in relation to your last point, that countries have very limited capacity to do things. Countries, I mean, politicians, state, private sector, civil organizations, all the actors, they have limited capacity to do this. So the niche strategy within a general framework, how do you go about doing this?
Oh, João, there are some people that call it micro-targeting. I don't like it that much because,
No, there was this old saying, yeah? Think globally, act locally, yeah?
Yes, that's why I don't like it that much. I don't like micro-targeting, but as a researcher of global value chain, that prefer to talk about finding these niches. I think that, as Mariama has said,
your microphone.
The methodologies for finding the needs, for mapping value chains, for understanding industrial policy in general are several. And if you start to design public policies, you always will discover what are the empty spaces. You see them. So when the government started to provide an example, we needed to better coordinate the value chains of these new technological goods. So we needed basically maps of batteries, of proteins, of health products, of machinery and equipment. And then when you look to those chains, you see the niche. You see, oh my God, so here we need to start processing critical minerals in Brazil or in Africa because we have them. So how can we process those critical minerals? And then when you find the problem and you identify the gap in the value chain, let's say, then you need to articulate those policies. And of course, they will be related to the funding problem and to the capacity, right? To the national innovation system capability to develop those activities, right? So then you have to start to coordinate actors and the responsibles for a policy. So if we look at the eolic offshore energy value chain, we know that we have opportunities. We had this value chain in the past that was built basically with the support of the National Development Bank, integrated with policies that could provide money and research and development to those value chains. So we can replicate this example, but we need now more innovative instruments because we live in a problem, this financial, especially related to the public budget, financial constraint, and we are disputing financial flows across the world, right? And so that's why, as we were saying before, and Fernanda also mentioned this, we need those innovative, sustainable finance instruments, and they will not only rechannel investments towards sustainability, but also define which are the sustainable activities, and this is the role of the taxonomy, and they will also allow for transparent information flow. And this is also key because we need a common understanding. That's why we need those standards and methodologies that will be available for everyone so that we can communicate better.
We have Fernanda wants to come in, and then Daniela, the innovative instruments. BNDES has tried for many years to introduce innovative. How will you come about? What are the chances? What do you have to mobilize? How do you convince people that, in a bank, in your credit evaluation, risk management people, how do you convince them, Fernanda?
No, it's just basically Christina is also saying that what we need is state capability because we need, to know how to do all those different arms of the process. But I wanted to also complement, and it has to do with your question, Ferraz. We don't know yet how to measure nature, and that is a major problem to direct financial flow, to direct fiscal policy. There is a lack of understanding of how much it's worth it. And if you want to properly measure risk and properly incorporate nature into the economic system, we have to know how to price, how to value them. There is the environmental account system that's trying to do so, but it hasn't been incorporated yet. And I do believe that's a problem also for central banks. Central banks, Mariana was saying that they are evolved in doing so much already with the networking for bringing the financial system, the G20s, the G20s, and many other actions they've been doing. However, I do believe that we have to account the double materiality, and this is something that it hasn't been incorporated yet. It's not only the climate change that affects the financial system, but the financial system affects the climate change. One thing that we can do, though, we don't know how to, we usually say we don't know what is green, we don't know how much the green is worth it, although the taxonomy is here to try to help that, but we know what's brown. And we have to incorporate it like stranded assets into the risk weighting. How we do that, that's a way of the central bank is starting to ask, is starting to act. And maybe that's the same problem for the development banks. I give the floor to Daniela now.
Thank you, Fernanda. Thank you, João. Now, looking at the bankable sides and how to move forward new industries, to foster new funding, and just provide an example. João, when we were here some years ago at the bank for forest projects, for example, native forest restoration, you used to have non-reimbursable funds from the Amazon Fund. There was only just that, or small parts of our own non-reimbursable fund at the BNDES, the Fundo Socioambiental, Socio-Environmental Fund. There was only grant possible to do with grants. And with looking at a political will and new policies and this ecological transformation plan, we can see, and our NEDC that depends on forest and restoration a lot, we can see could be a new bankable sector. How to shift a granting sector towards a bankable sector. So this question was raised here, and we move with many instruments to deal with that, and many people and our expertise in connecting dots and connecting partnerships, governmental and private sector and multilateral organizations and so forth. And using also the climate fund that I mentioned before with concessional funds for restoration, that's the lowest interest rate for that in the fund. We can have now credit projects for native forest restoration. And we dealt with private guarantees from some other banks that are engaged in the agenda, also looking for the carbon credit system, even the mandatory one and the voluntary one, and also it's not only a credit, it's a movement. So we still have non-reimbursable for the restoration arc in the Amazon Fund, in other funds, but we have also this side of credit and the side of looking and studying the value chain of native forests, because you don't have enough seeds to restore everything. So we have to study that and engage with IDB to take a look at the situation, the look of this in Brazil, the chain, and also try to look at the forest concessions also and connect the structuring projects. It's not only a bankable side, but a service side from BNDES, using all our business models and our business possibilities here. Capital markets, structuring projects, that's a kind of service, and credit and non-reimbursable to boost and to create a new bankable sector that's native forest. So engaging with Petrobras to standardize carbon credit and voluntary markets, the contracts, the agreements, that they are all different. And if you have a stable and standardized agreement, we can use as a receivable for a bank, for example. You provide more security, more stable language for the market. So you create the market. And it's using all the instruments and expertise that BNDES has as a National Development Bank in the dots with other partners. These are some of the examples.
Okay. Now, from different perspectives, all of you have more or less years engaged into not only analyzing, but thinking solution or pressing for solutions. Actually build a solid base for optimism that there will be positive outcomes. What would be the essential elements of policy evolution, policy learning in time? Mariama, from your experience, do you see progress, and where do you see progress in your agenda? What would be the elements? What are the pieces that made possible that little progress, even if it is small? In Fernanda and Galindo, in the methodology, in the conceptual framework, where do you see elements? And Cristina, it's maybe 2 years that you've been engaged, and the list of issues that you have put about, the taxonomy, the bonds, sovereign bonds, and the climate fund. It's a collection, and not to mention Daniela. So, Daniela, what would be the elements within your institutions? What are the essentials there? So that, if we can grasp a bit about this, we'll be more hopeful. Who wants to come?
I guess I can.
All right, Mariama.
In terms of solid basis for optimism, I think Fernanda flagged the question of double materiality, right? Which I think is a sticky point, because when we come in, even with the Paris Agreement, we talk about how climate affect finance, and we had hope there's this whole fascination about transition risk, horizon and stuff. But my entry point and the entry point of CSO is the other way. How is finance driving the drivers of climate change? And here, I think the elements of policy evolution is important where we start from, because what we find now, we have instruments, right? Say on the Paris Agreement, NDCs. But now we have to go back to retrofit NDCs to take into account fundamental things, social development, equity, and now I think even another round of them is going to have to take in trade climate linkage. Because trade climate linkage and the volatility of exchange rates impacts climate finance. The climate finance promise, the climate finance received. And those things were never a part of the discussion. But they show up when we look at what's happening in the Green Climate Fund in terms of how much money it has, what has the exchange rates valuation shifted. When countries receive money, and they receive money in dollars and or euros or whatever, and the exchange rate. The trade climate dynamics in terms of what the volume and composition of your trade,
yes,
in terms of the impact of climate on agriculture. Another round where we have to go back and retrofit these things. And so this retrofitting, going back to retrofit because we don't take in fundamental concerns, really dilute the impact of policies.
Isn't the retrofitting inevitable?
Some of it, but it shouldn't be fundamental. It should be where you're tinkering on the margins, right? Not changing fundamental structural shift. For example, for the Caribbean, right? For regions that evolve out of trade, the fundamental starting point of any NDC should have been about how climate impacts trade. and how the different ways in which we are addressing climate include, and here I'm thinking about the European CBAM, the Carbon Border Trading Mechanism, how those things impact trade should have been fundamental. Gender and inequality issues are fundamental. Poverty eradication are fundamental. And then you can, so we get stuck at looking at issues that they're not cosmetic, they're important, but they don't help to make the financing effective or move us closer towards addressing solutions, right? Whether we're looking at biodiversity, or whether we're looking at SDG, or whether we're looking at climate. So I think recognition, some of the progress, of course, has been the recognition of care and climate, the recognition of trade and climate, the recognition of the equity dimensions beyond the North-South dimension, which is already in the convention in biodiversity and in climate. But also another important policy dimension is the regional solidarity, right? Because in regions, you have these trans-border climate issues, right? That we haven't begun to tackle when we started looking, where I was doing El Salvador's adaptation plan, and when we were looking at what is going on in terms of water and in terms of the forecasting of climate impact, you see that there are transboundary issues, and in Asia also there are transboundary issues. Those can't be tacked on later on. Those are fundamental issues that have to be integrated into climate plans.
But do you see progress from your experience?
I see progress in the recognition, right? So we're at the point where we're recognizing it, and now and once you recognize the problem, then you start getting the case studies and the different analysis from civil society, from academia, from the central bank, and so forth. And then you start molding and fixing. But that's important. But it's fragmented in the sense that we don't have
it's still
the taxonomies, even in the financial central bank. And you would think that central banks of all the actors have very concrete, similar methodology. Finance is finance everywhere in the world. But yet the taxonomies are different, even within the EU and across EU, right? In Latin America, we don't have a systematic taxonomy. In the Caribbean, there isn't. So we have regional entities, but they're not doing the nitty-gritty work.
Coordination.
Yeah, of coordination and building that political will and responding, and planning, which is where I think central bank and academias have time, because central banks have tremendous staff. Academia have time. NGOs are firefighting. Governments sometimes are firefighting. Even government ministries are firefighting in many cases. They don't have the resources unless they're linking. And I think there's need for closer integration between a lot of our government ministries and our academia.
Wow,
to bring academia into policy making.
Well, academia, what do you have to say about this? It's a provocation that she is making, yeah?
Yeah, just
it's a good provocation.
Yeah, so 3 points. No? In general, I'm not an optimism. I would say in economic terms, I don't believe in Pareto optimum, but I believe in Pareto pessimum. And however, I'm going to give you a bit of positive sides of what's happening. I think the change to solve climate change, you really need a huge political, economic, social, and cultural movement in a completely different way. No? And I think there are some evidence of that. No? I mean, some of us that we are old, we can remember when we used to go to hotels and they didn't have any rule or regulations of sustainable development. No? For example, the towels, they clean it every day, all these things. No? Or it's hard to go someplace and they don't have at least some of these rules. No? And if you begin to see each different markets, you have seen this movement, no? Food, furniture, cars, and everything. No? So I think culturally we are moving in this direction. However, this movement is not straight and it's slow. So it might not have enough time to make it. No? But I think in that, if you want to see it as a progress, I think it's moving in that sense. No? The second thing I think it's important, I think it's increasing the idea of a positive narrative to solve climate change. I mean, it's more and more the idea that solving climate change will improve the economic condition and the social welfare and the environmental, and that will be a gain for people. No? I'm going to make a very silly example on that, but for example, when we see how much we spend in Latin America in certain goods, for example, electricity, transport, and heating, and other parts of this, you more or less arrive to 20% of expenditure. If you really move that one to renewable energy and you put it really low, the prices of that, then you will support the people, and that you can begin to think of a better welfare for those people. No? And it's perfectly linked with the transition to new renewable energy sources. No? So I think there is a lot of narratives there that they are trying to show that, and I think it's the basis of the general social consensus. And the third point of optimism is I remember the times that the central banks, the national development banks, and the finance minister, they didn't even talk about this topic. No, you basically, when you were to talk with them, they say, "Well, this is not the right window. No, you need to go to the environmental minister and talk about that topic there." No, now you see more and more the involvement and the discussion on how to involve financial ministers, central banks, development banks, and these things. No, again, it's probably too slow, but at least it's in the movement in the right direction. No, and it could have some changes or oscillation on that. No, so I think we can build on these parts of positivism and try to enhance them to move faster and in a more global sense. No, otherwise, I don't think we are going to get to the targets we have.
Evolving by example. Fernanda, Daniela, you want Fernanda?
Danny, would you like to?
Sorry. Cristina is out because of technical problems at the Ministry of Finance, their connections that they have. So she suddenly left, and she just WhatsApped me saying that they have technical problems with the connection. Sorry, Fernanda.
Yeah, that's okay. And a practical example of the needs of state capability also, because it's also practical as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm as positive as Miguel, as Galindo, in the sense I don't think we're gonna reach on time the pace, the direction, and the volume of capital we need. Although we're improving, I think it's still very low pace, and the volume of change that we need far beyond what the volume of change that we are doing are far beyond lower than what we need. Unfortunately, I know it's difficult. It's been difficult to reach those changes, but we need so much more. And the productions pattern and the emissions, they are still increasing. We are already 1.2 degrees higher than the temperature in the pre-industrial level. So we are going to reach most likely the 1.5 degree by the end of this decade. So I think things will get worse before they get better. As for what we can do is, remain punching the wall. We still have to be coming up with solutions and kind of regulations and new ways of measuring and new ways of thinking about the financial system, the financial flow, strengthening central banks, strengthening development banks, public banks. They are, I have to stress this, I think public and development banks are the key agents in this transition. They are the only ones who can move in a different pace and a different strategy. Brazil and Latin America has this tremendous chance of using this network of public banks in order to do so. And I think the Brazilian Development Bank is at a place that it can lead this process within Latin America, not only within Brazil. So yes, the The elements of policy evolution, I think, probably are the public banks.
What
Not as
weight she's putting on you, and Daniela?
I know it
Yeah,
is.
yeah,
You not
yeah.
Daniela person, but Daniela
Yeah.
representative of BNDES. Yeah.
Yeah, not as much as central
I can
bankers.
feel
I
on
don't.
my shoulders the way
Yeah,
Fernanda
yeah,
is
you have a
providing.
huge responsibility, Danny. It is
Well,
true.
no, but you see, at this point, before Daniela comes with the fostering side, some of you mentioned, I think Chris in particular, that regulation is important. And in fact, we just did a research with industrial firms and their environment practices, and we asked them what moved them in order to move in their environment practices, finance and all this, the incentive side, regulation very strong. So
It is, yeah.
regulation actually makes them move on a certain direction. So strong regulation we need, and different types of regulation, yeah. But now we leave. Sorry, Fernanda.
Yeah, Danny, before you speak, can I just say one more thing? It's just with everything we're saying, we have in common one key agent here, which is the state. Regulation is done by the state. Public banks are controlled by the states. Central banks should be a public policy, and central banks should understand themselves as part of the state. Coordination, cooperation, it is part of what the state should be doing, the national states.
Yeah.
So
we have to the stick and carrot, yeah. So we
exactly,
go that policy is important. We are 12 minutes to end. Policy is important, state capability is important, stick carrot, so let's start moving on the direct before this, Daniela. And I have one question for all of you after Daniela.
Yeah. You may say risks and opportunities, no, carrots and incentives and risks, because central bank can see on the systemic side, risk side, but they can also boost new instruments and new ways for the financial institutions to understand the opportunities arising from the agenda. And I feel this is very, very interesting because, for example, internally, of course, we have a whole history on financing sustainability, but now we encapsulate and we coordinate the whole agenda in a CSR policy. So it's a dimension that's regulated by the central bank. They demand that each financial institution in Brazil, either developing or not, private ones, they must have a policy, a social, environment, and climate policy to guide a plan of actions. And now at BNDES, we have all the strategic side of social, environment, and climate, either from the instruments and programs to finance or provide service to climate aspects, but also the back office part. So the risk side, the capabilities, attributions, and dimension on transparency, indicators. You mentioned also Mariama, Fernanda, all this evaluation program, they are all together encapsulating this big plan of action from our social and environment and climate policy. And we coordinate this internally from the whole risk area, the planning area, the infrastructure area. All of them has to be attached in a coordinated way to this agenda. And of course, indicators, as you mentioned, and evaluation, they in the climate agenda, especially in adaptation, they are still evolving. We don't have all the instruments to tackle properly. We have to induce the projects in municipalities, in governors, but we also have to create indicators and new indicators to measure, for example, vulnerability people with that were benefit from a project of macro drainage or something, a resilience project in a municipality, for example. So we have these challenges, but they are also evolving aspects from our lessons learned in a positive way to evolve the agenda. You know, I see all this in the capabilities and attributions created with an agenda that's regulatory, coordinated with policies in the side of the transformation ecological plan and also the central bank policies, but also internally we can drink, we can absorb these whole structures and strengthen our action agenda.
With a lot of tenacity, I imagine, yeah? So we are 8 minutes to the end, and Cristina really is not going to make, she just texted me saying that she's not going to be able to come back. To end, 2 minutes for each one of you. In terms of what do you, what are the key issues that you think that you should be engaging in the next few years? And which would be the ideal partners for you in this engagement agenda? Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Sorry, João, it was a little bit difficult to hear, I think, my internet. If you can repeat, please.
Yes. Basically, what is the relevant agenda that you'll be engaged in the years to come? And who would be your favorite partners or dream partners in your agenda in the years to come? So that, that you can tell our audience, which I thank for being here, that they will have a glimpse of what your work agenda and research agenda and action agenda in the years to come. So I don't know who wants to come first.
I can say very quickly because it's...
All right.
Yeah.
2 minutes.
I think the key issue, 30 seconds, key issues, reforming international financial architecture. Key players, development banks, public banks, central banks, the government, federal and local.
Yeah, but how do you fit this into your agenda?
This is my agenda. Yeah, this is my whole agenda. That's what I'm studying. What the central banks can do and how the regulation should be changed, key instruments, how to measure value, how incorporated nature into fiscal policies. That's the whole agenda. Yeah.
That's your research agenda in the years to come. Yes.
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Who else want to come?
Just
Galindo?
Galindo, please.
No, okay, just go, please.
Galindo.
Okay. So I would say that we would be engaging in fostering the climate and social and environmental agenda because they are all together, and climate impacts a lot social aspects and economic and so forth. Developing a bank, all these are important. It should be managed together in a proper way. And I would run away from choosing or picking just one partner or just one side, João, because we have to. I think this agenda should engage everyone. We could not leave anyone behind, and so we have to engage even from the policy side. So governors that should engage in public consultation, civil society, in committees, and everywhere. also to implement this through instruments, financial instruments. We are here to engage private sector, multilateral organizations, multilateral organisms, groups of countries, developing agenda, clubs, everyone. I feel that we need in this agenda to reinforce.
Right. Galindo and Mariama to close.
Yeah, I think the idea that climate change is a development issue, the idea that we need to develop financial sector consistent with the climate change agreement and with the physical and transition risks, and the idea and relevance that it's taking more adaptation and nature for this transition.
Good. Mariama.
Well, for me, it's very difficult because I'm in a kind of a assessment of kind of what has worked, where we are, and what the future look like in terms of what my participation be. But I think in terms of where we are from the literature and from some of the points that were made earlier by Miguel and also Fernanda in terms of the possibilities that we have left, the urgencies on the drawing board. There are four things that I'm key to look at: sustainable infrastructure in terms of the built and natural world, sustainable economics, really integrating the social and the economic, but also drawing in spiritual and mutual aid in terms of, I think we need to bring in communities of, I'm also a yoga therapist and I do a lot of meditation and stuff. So there's all this work around mindful economics, mindful adaptation. That ties a lot very much with some of the gender thing that I've been doing. And also I think we're not going to solve any of this without just transitions. And it's not a just transition at multiple tracks about it. And also how we continue to build systems of representation, knowledge and decision making, and the kind of epistemology that we throw out some stuff, bring in some other stuff, maybe around measurement, taxonomies and so forth, that doesn't yet serve us. So I think a lot of work to be done. So academic, CSOs, and research institutions are where I would look. Of course, the finance is important, so tracking the finance. And I do really believe fundamentally that financing should be channeled through national development banks. I think they're ones on the ground. They know their community best. They're in their nations. And most all nations have them, and Brazil has a fantastic one, and others inside Brazil also, but the NDS. But I think we really need to relook. I think the initial thrust about focusing on MDBs, even the regional ones, have not panned out much in terms of the effectiveness of moving finance to the bottom. And then I think it's also important that we pay attention. One of the progress I would say to flag is one of the things that it's amazing that we could think that we have 20 years of a convention and we have the last 15 years of struggle over finance, and nobody for all these COPs have been convening ministers of finance. I mean, they do come, but they haven't played the significant role that they should play. And I think one of the things that I really want to give credit to Brazil for is this ministers of finance climate circle. Because ministers of finance are critical.
Yeah.
Same level as the energy and the environment. Because without finance, we're not moving.
Yeah.
So I think that's it. But also really reckoning with what civil society and communities are doing. Because communities are responding on the ground because they have to. And I think we need to look at that and see what we can upscale and what we can support. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very, very, very much for being here, for candidly sharing your thoughts. I hope that the people that is following us have enjoyed and profit from the opinions and comments and knowledge of these people that we have been here. Mariama, thank you. Luis Miguel, Fernanda, Daniela, and Cristina in absentia. And thank you, Red Sur, and thanks IDRC for making all this possible. We say goodbye now.
Thank you, João. Thank you.
And hope to see you soon somewhere.
All right.
Yes, thank you very
Bye.
much.
Thank you.
See
Bye.
you. Good.